I would like to thank the last two speakers and move on to the final presentation concerning the issue of constructing the WMD-Free zone in the Middle East, which will be presented by Camille, who is, of course, the director and the co-host of this meeting, and he has been the director of the Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique, the FRS, the leading French think tank on defense and security since 2008. He has also been an associate lecturer at the Sciences Po in Paris since 1998. Between 1998 and 2008, he served in the French government, holding senior positions in the Ministries of Defense and Foreign Affairs, and he has previously worked with several French and European think tanks. He has published extensively on European security, non-proliferation, and nuclear policy. He has also been a member of the UN Secretary General Advisory Board on Disarmament Matters since 2014. Camille, please.
Thank you. I got the Middle East WMD-Free zone, and I feel a bit like in Alexei Arbatov's joke, of that yesterday, for those who weren't there was this discussion about building the Koban or building communism, and I get to build communism. So to work on the long-term perspective. Maybe just before I start, just one quick comment on the previous presentations, which were all excellent. There's one thing that struck me, and that is a difference between the Gulf and Israel, probably, is that I don't think any of you mentioned the role of the Europeans in the deterrence scheme, which is not something that the Gulfies do. The Gulfies are interested in getting security commitments from Britain, from France, vis-à-vis Iran. And that's an interesting difference, and it's just to complicate Avner's multiplayer deterrence, because this is something that they actually like the idea that they could drag the West through others. And Bruno's comment on the Louvre was not completely outside the discussion. So let me go back to the Middle East WMD-Free zone. I guess you're all familiar with the debate. I'll wrap it up in a minute for those of you who've not followed it, because but it's been a very big diplomatic debate, primarily, with a lot of security implications, of course. And this debate is not taking place in a vacuum, even though diplomats sometimes enjoy the fact that it's taking place in a vacuum. But the reality is that this effort towards working on the WMD-Free zone is a long effort, which started back in 1974 with the promise of the first attempt by Iran then to have a discussion on a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. Was restarted in 1995 as part of a package that extended the NPT indefinitely, and again in 2010, so in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty framework, there was a significant relaunch, part of a package at the 2010 NPT conference, under pressure of many Arab countries led by Egypt, who wanted to keep the 1995 promise alive. We should remember that, of course, Israel was not in the room. Maybe they were in the next room, but not in the room for that actual negotiation and document. So that led to a process that was supposed to lead to the so-called 2012 conference, which hasn't taken place yet. So now we are invited no longer to call it the 2012 conference, because this is being rude to those who are supposed to organize it or take part in it. So it's called the Middle East WMD-Free Zone Conference. At the Helsinki process, because we do have a facilitator. So this was supposed to be convened by the depositories of the NPT, the US, UK, and Russia, and facilitated by Finland, which was chosen after a rather lengthy process, Ambassador Lajava being the facilitator, working hard to make that happen. Of course, As you know, the process since 2010 has been rather bumpy. The appointment of the facilitator was complicated. There were multiple vetoes on the choice of the right country and person. I'm not sure that had the things known, they would have volunteered for the job. But ultimately, they've taken the job. Of course, the conference has not taken place, as you noticed, and even no formal event leading to the conference have taken place. And this is there. There has been quite a lot of informal efforts. I was personally involved in the EU efforts as I co-chaired the two conferences. I don't even remember the title because that was such a lengthy negotiation. So we have about a 5-line title of an EU informal conference leading, maybe leading to the effort, possibly leading to the convening of a conference that could possibly, and so on. So but that was quite interesting. By the way, I mean it's I'm half joking here because. I mean, after all, we had the Israelis and the Iranians in the room, engaging in their own ways. We had, at least for the first meeting, all of the Arabs in the room. For the second one, it was more ambiguous. There was a semi-Arab boycott, which but wasn't really clear. So it was a bit strange. There was a lot of substantive papers prepared and produced for that, and a lot of discussion. So it was not I don't think it was a waste of time, but it didn't, of course, was not meant to deliver per se. And there is a second, more process of also informal, which is so-called Glion process, which is behind closed doors, and that has had, I think, 4 meetings and 3 or 3.5, as some have said. So it's been a rather interesting process, but that has not delivered either on creating the conditions for a conference. So why is that so? Of course, we can enter the sort of blaming game. Israel has always been reluctant in the first place. The Arabs are divided and unrealistic. They are only focused, some of them are only focused on the Israeli nuclear capabilities, making the debate almost impossible to move forward. And there has also been a number of comments on the let's say, not truly engaged role of the depositories or some of the limits of the role of the facilitator that hasn't been directive enough and all of that. I don't think this is very interesting to go down that route of trying to find responsibilities, because we knew all the way that it was an extraordinarily difficult process. So the point is not at finger pointing at that. Having said all of this, I think we should also look and take into account the developments in the real world since 2010, because that is part of the problem. Obviously, the lack of solution to the Iranian nuclear crisis has been a shadow looming very heavily. I'll come back to that in a second on the prospect for such a zone, as it sort of demonstrates the fact that proliferation continues in a way. Secondly, on Syria, the use of chemical weapons has made the debate even more fragile, because suddenly we see that with the use of chemical weapons, we see a taboo being broken in the Middle East. So you could argue both ways. I mean, it makes the need for a WMD-free zone all the more relevant on the one hand. But on the other hand, it really demonstrates that we are not tackling here with an abstract issue, but with something that is extraordinarily concrete. There are some benefits of the Syrian chemical crisis on the fact that the problem was addressed through diplomacy, that Syria did join the CWC, which, and Syria being previously one of the outbound to that, and the disarmament is underway, even though it is not completed. So those are clear real-world development. Of course, the fact that the peace process hasn't moved forward in the Israeli Palestinian or Israeli-Syrian context doesn't help. It's part of the broader picture, but as this whole debate about the free zone is very connected to security, it is clearly there. And to be honest, we have to be fair on the fact that security concerns in the region are not, moving necessarily in the right direction, and we see more concerns, not only in this country but in many others. We see more instability. The Arab Springs have not led to more stability everywhere, to use a euphemism, and we see domestic turmoil, which has, of course, implication for this. And what is clear is that the situation is in a way more complex than it was in 2010. Who are we dealing with when we are asking the Syrians to take a step towards this process? What are the implications of the Arab Spring on the security perceptions in the Gulf or in Iran? All of these issues are there. Who will sign for Libya? Those are complicated issues. So now what? I think we can look at a sort of scenario-based approach. The most, let's say, optimistic scenario from a, let's say, diplomatic standpoint would be that efforts to deliver a conference do succeed before the 2015 NPT conference. I don't think it's completely unlikely, and I think it's important for the NPT. Why do I say it's not completely unlikely? I think Israel has been playing ball. I saw that for myself in the events I was engaged in. Many Arabs are interested in achieving progress on this because they value the topic and they see. And as we come closer to, and it's interesting, for instance, to see how the Saudis have been supporting of that idea there. And we also see that as we come closer to the 2015 NPT conference, the non-regional players will become more focused on trying to get something. So the combination of the three could deliver. Of course, there are conditions, and what is hard for this process is that it's highly dependent on external factors. To paraphrase Clemenceau, I mean, the three most important factors are Iran, Iran, and Iran, of course. Because in the absence of a good or acceptable, to use Amos' image, Iranian nuclear deal, I think the WMD discussions will not take off because it will create, not only in this country but elsewhere, a certain degree of distrust that will not help moving forward on this particular issue. Of course, another factor is how do we finish the job in Syria with regard to chemical disarmament. This is a critical issue. I mean, if this ends up being, I wouldn't say a success story, because of course it starts with an extremely sad story, but with something that is completed, it's one small conditions that would be met. If not, and if we see as we've been seeing new suspected users and things like that, I mean, of course, it creates more concern that the feasibility of such a zone is very complicated. And then, of course, the global security perception do matter for that, and it's a broader picture, but I won't come back to that. I would argue, nevertheless, that the process has some sort of intrinsic value, and that's something that should be taken into account. But the problem is there is that the lack of that is not necessarily perceived by the regional actors, and because if you see value in the process, you tend to be flexible on having the process moving forward. This is not the case for everyone, and I sort of fear a form of instrumentalization by some of the players that would contemplate failure as a way to make the point that this is not moving forward, and this is a problem. The second problem I see is a lack of ownership necessarily at the political level. And that's, I mean, with the Middle East WMD-free zone, we are in a typical case, from my perspective, where the diplomats and experts involved are very involved, but I'm not completely sure that the political level in any of the key players is aware or involved. And that's a problem, because in a way, I mean, even if the most talented diplomat finds some sort of solution, will the leadership in Israel, in Egypt, in Iran or elsewhere buy that? And that's a complicated situation, I believe. That was very clear with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, that they were, that you better not ask what they felt about the process, because that's not the sort of answer you would not be happy with the sort of answer you would get. But has this completely changed? How much do leaders prioritize this issue? Do they see it as something valuable or not? I'm pretty unclear about that, and I look forward to the discussion afterwards. And then, of course, there are plenty of technical issues to be resolved, but that's for the process to resolve. I don't want to go into this, but we are fully aware that even CBMs are extraordinarily difficult, not to mention verification and concrete steps of signing specific treaties. A second scenario is the collapse of the process. I wouldn't say it's impossible. I think we can, in this case, look at very bitter debates at the 2015 NPT conference. I think there are clear signs that it wouldn't be a consensus on anything if we see a collapse of the process. And the broader consequences for the NPT will be complicated. I don't know whether those who've been playing with the idea of withdrawing or boycotting the NPT are serious about it, whether it's posturing or serious, but that's part of a problem. I don't think at this stage it can serve as a pretext for pulling out of the NPT, but in the longer term you don't know. So that's the issue. And what would be very difficult is, if the process does collapse, how do you replace it? And this is where, again, I think the process has some sort of intrinsic value. Some would argue that it doesn't really matter, that it was always a toy for diplomats, and in the real world, who cares about that? I'm not sure this is a wise approach altogether. My third scenario, which is the most likely, is the sort of ongoing debates, which I trust the diplomats for finding a way to dress up a lack of progress by making clear the process continues, maybe having some sort of technical meeting that would allow to make that point with some credibility, and hopefully that would allow some steps to be taken that help create the conditions to work towards that. There are still plenty of let's say non-strategic decisions to be made that would allow some confidence building. And the problem is that many hold those those cards in their sleeves, waiting for the real bargaining to start. But you can look at multiple, if when we were doing those conferences, we listed the whole series of agreements. I mean, besides the NPT, the CWC, the BTWC, there are plenty of text treaties, I mean, the Hague Code of Conduct on missile proliferation and things like that, that are pretty easy to sign and that would enable an image of progress. Of course, what is most needed is a deepening of the dialogue on security, but I don't see that at the moment, but that could happen. So the issue is, can we do better than muddling through from a possible conference to another possible conference without any significant change? And I guess for that is for regional players to agree to a serious conversation at some point rather than posturing, and that's challenging. I would say that keep in mind, because in the title of the presentation there was the issue of alternative to having such a process, and there I think the alternatives are not really bright. It's not as if you would say who hasn't thought about this great plan that would solve the problem immediately? That doesn't really exist. The alternative to that is a situation in which, as we were just discussing, we might see further proliferation with newcomers in the region, an increasing risk of use or renewed use of WMD, and a weakening of the overall non-proliferation regime, which is in nobody's interest in the region and beyond. Of course, for that, we need to admit that we need more trust amongst regional players and improved security for all, which has been a sort of one of the key words of the debate, and improved security for all. All the words matter in that context. And one of the issues is how can external players, non-regional players, play a positive role on this. For me, it's been a bit unclear. A lot of the countries or organizations that have given it a try have had a hard time. They sort of burnt their fingers. I did experience that within the EU system. They really genuinely tried to have something interesting. I think it was interesting, at least from an academic standpoint. I don't know whether it was interesting from a political standpoint. But ultimately, they ended up with this semi-Arab boycott and clear messages that there was no interest. And now it's interesting because you see Arabs coming back to the EU and saying, "How come you're no longer active?" So that's interesting moment. But it's and you could probably say the same of the depositories, the facilitator that have been having a hard time trying to make this happen. So that doesn't. That doesn't make things easy. So that's why, in a way, I think the ownership and the core issue lies with the regional players, because without them, of course, this doesn't make any sense. Thank you very much.